Let's be honest, Linda Worthington scoffed, loud enough for the whole boutique to hear. Girls like her don't come in here to buy. They come in to loiter or steal, and if you're too afraid to say it, I will. The manager said nothing. The staff pretended not to hear. And Amara Daniels, 16 years old, composed beyond her years, just stood there, her expression unreadable, her hands still folded calmly in front of her. She simply reached into her pocket, pulled out her phone, and made a single call. And the moment Malcolm Daniels stepped through the glass doors, the air inside the boutique changed. Linda Worthington didn't know it yet, but she was about to learn a lesson. About power, about presence, and about what happens when the girl you try to humiliate turns out to own the ground you're standing on. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe. The glass doors whispered shut behind her with the kind of smooth finality that always made upscale places feel like they were sealing off the outside world. Like once you crossed in, you were expected to act, walk, speak a certain way. The boutique was quiet, the air heavy with some faint floral perfume laced through the vents, and every inch of the room, from the velvet-trimmed racks to the gold-rimmed mirrors, radiated exclusivity in the way only places designed to intimidate could. Amara Daniels, 16, walked in like she'd been here 100 times before, even though she hadn't. She moved with that unteachable ease that made people stop and look. Tall, clean lines in her posture, high bun, sharp and neat, hoodie zipped halfway over a subtle designer tee, her sneakers crisp and understated, but unmistakably limited edition. She didn't need a greeting or a guiding hand. She scanned the room calmly, eyes drifting over sequined gowns and sculpted bodices, letting the silence stretch as she slowly stepped toward a display at the center of the boutique, a dress in soft rose gold that shimmered beneath the warm light, like it was glowing from within. She reached out to touch the fabric, letting her fingertips graze it lightly. Her father's charity gala was in 3 weeks, and though she'd visited other boutiques with her mother, none of those dresses had felt quite right. This one might. She was just about to check the tag when a voice slid across the room behind her, thin and syruped with forced politeness, but colder underneath. "Well, some of us are feeling bold today, aren't we?" Amara turned her head slightly, just enough to place the voice. A woman, white, maybe early 60s, stood nearby with a handbag tucked against one arm, draped in a lavender coat that practically screamed old money. Her makeup was precise, her posture rigid, and she wore the kind of smile that didn't touch the eyes. She hadn't come from behind the counter. She hadn't stepped out of the back. She was a customer, just another shopper. But the way she looked at Amara made it clear she saw herself as more than that. "I'm sorry," Amara asked, politely, though her voice carried no confusion. The woman took a slow step closer, eyes flicking over Amara's outfit, pausing just a moment too long on the hoodie and sneakers before settling on her face. "Just saying, some people walk in here like it's a clearance sale at the mall. No offense, of course." She smiled again, brittle and pointed. "But boutiques like this don't usually carry casual items." Amara didn't move. She didn't frown or flinch. She just looked at the woman for a long moment and then turned back toward the gown without saying a word. She'd learned that silence could be louder than anything when it was used right. But the woman didn't stop. "Oh, don't get me wrong, dear. I'm all for ambition, dreaming big. But maybe be mindful of how you handle the merchandise. Some of these dresses cost more than your rent, I'd imagine." From behind the counter, the boutique manager, a white woman in her 30s named Carly, looked up from her tablet. Her eyes flicked between them, lips parting like she might say something, but she didn't. She stayed behind the counter, her fingers drumming lightly against the glass. Amara exhaled softly, turned around fully, and faced the woman with a calm so smooth it almost looked rehearsed. "I'm here to shop," she said. "Not to explain myself." "Oh, I'm sure," the woman replied with a small chuckle, the kind people used to pretend they weren't saying what they were saying. "It's just, last week, Something went missing during a sale, and, well, it's easy to assume. Amara blinked. Assume what? That not everyone's here with good intentions, the woman said, voice tilting upward as though her words were innocent. And if something turns up missing again, well, we'd all be questioned, wouldn't we? It's happened before. Carly cleared her throat, barely audible. One of the other staff members, taller, younger, trying to fold a dress on the far side of the store, glanced over with wide eyes but didn't move. Amara stared at the woman, then at Carly, then back again. You think I came in here to steal? I didn't say that, the woman answered quickly, that syrupy tone slipping just a little, giving way to something sharper. I'm just saying it'd be better for everyone if you showed your bag now, just so there's no confusion. Best to clear things up early before it becomes a situation. The air in the boutique grew heavier. Amara didn't raise her voice. She didn't ask for help. She reached calmly into her hoodie pocket, pulled out her phone, unlocked it with her thumb, and scrolled to the top contact. Her finger hovered for only a moment before she tapped the screen. When the call connected, she raised the phone to her ear and spoke, her voice smooth and steady. Hey, she said, you need to come down here. It's one of those situations again. She lowered the phone and met the woman's eyes, her expression unreadable. And just like that, the boutique froze. The call ended, but Amara didn't move. She slid the phone back into her pocket with the same quiet grace she'd carried since stepping into the boutique, then turned her full attention to the woman standing inches away, her expression no longer cold, but glacial, the kind of stare that didn't flinch, didn't falter, and didn't ask permission to exist. You need to step back, Amara said, her voice low and exact. Now. For a heartbeat, the woman, still clinging to her smugness like a shawl, held her ground. But something in Amara's tone, in the way she didn't look away, didn't raise her voice or retreat, struck a nerve that words couldn't protect. The woman narrowed her eyes, her face tightening around the corners of her mouth as she slowly stepped back, but not far, just enough to obey, without conceding. I was only trying to help, she muttered, but the words sounded weak now, unsure of themselves, more defense than conviction. Amara said nothing in return. She'd already spent too much breath on people who expected her to earn her place in rooms they walked into without a second thought. Instead, she turned back to the display, her fingers gliding once again over the fabric that had first caught her eye. No tension in her shoulders, no flinch in her spine, just a calm, deliberate presence that made it clear she wasn't going anywhere. Across the boutique, Carly still hadn't moved from behind the register. Her posture was rigid, eyes glued to the tablet she was no longer pretending to read. And though her lips had parted once or twice, maybe to say something, maybe just to breathe, she said nothing. The other associate hovered by the far wall, dress still folded in her hands, watching with the kind of frozen guilt that only came from knowing exactly what was happening, but not being willing to step into it. The silence in the room had changed. Before, it had been the hush of luxury, of curated playlists and whispered consultations. Now it was sharp, humming with tension, the kind that settled into the bones and made every movement feel louder than it should. Amara reached for a second gown, emerald green this time, with a sweeping neckline and subtle beadwork. She held it up against herself in the mirror and tilted her head slightly, considering. Behind her, the woman had retreated to a spot near one of the lounging chairs, but her gaze had not moved. She stood there stiffly, arms crossed, her expression a blend of indignation and disbelief, as though she were trying to will Amara out of the space through sheer force of disapproval. Her mouth twitched every so often, lips pressing into thinner and thinner lines. But she said nothing. For now, Amara continued shopping, letting her hand move from one dress to another, each motion unhurried, each step taken with the deliberate poise of someone who knew exactly how much space she was entitled to. She moved deeper into the boutique, exploring racks with lace detailing and velvet skirts, holding one up to the light just long enough to watch it shimmer before placing it back gently. Her body language said everything. This was not a girl shrinking, not a girl begging to be allowed, but a girl who had already decided she belonged. It was only when she circled back toward the original display that she felt the woman's eyes still burning into her like twin spotlights, no longer subtle, no longer even pretending to be polite. The stare was open now, hostile, filled with that familiar cocktail of entitlement and outrage that bloomed when power slipped just out of reach. This was no longer about suspicion. It was about the unbearable truth that her accusations hadn't worked, that the girl hadn't been embarrassed into leaving, that she hadn't cried or raised her voice, or even looked particularly rattled. She had simply remained. The boutique doors hadn't opened since the call. No one else had come in or left. The staff still hovered in limbo, caught between the desire to de-escalate and the fear of offending a regular customer. Carly glanced toward the front of the store again, and this time her throat moved visibly as she swallowed. Amara didn't look at her. She didn't need to. Instead, she stepped toward the register and placed the emerald dress carefully on the counter, her voice calm as she spoke. "I'd like to try this on, please." Carly blinked as though waking from a trance, eyes flicking to the dress, then to Amara, then to the woman standing silently across the room. For a long second, she said nothing. Then she nodded stiffly and gestured toward the fitting rooms without speaking. Amara picked up the dress again and walked past the woman without so much as a glance, her steps measured, posture tall, the fabric swaying lightly at her side like a banner. And the woman, still standing there, still clinging to her outrage like a badge, watched her go, silent now, her fury eating away at her in bitter, helpless silence. The fitting room door clicked shut behind her with a satisfying softness, sealing her away from the tense stillness outside, if only for a few minutes. Inside, the lighting was gentle, the walls lined with soft ivory fabric and gold-framed mirrors that curved slightly at the edges to create the illusion of endless space. Amara stood in front of the largest one, holding the emerald dress by its hanger, the fabric folding delicately over her forearm like ivy. She took a moment, breathing slowly, as her fingers worked the zipper at the back, peeling off her hoodie and jeans with the quiet efficiency of someone trained to be composed, even when fury pulsed just beneath the surface. She'd long since mastered the art of hiding heat behind elegance, of pushing down the sting until it cooled into something colder, something that could not be dismissed. The dress slid over her frame like it had been waiting for her. It hugged her lightly at the waist and draped down in clean, flawless lines that shimmered faintly with each breath. The green was deep but rich, catching the light in quiet flashes that made her skin glow with a warmth that brought out the golden undertones in her complexion. She turned once, slowly, watching the hem brush just above her ankles, the neckline dipping gently without giving too much, graceful and strong all at once. For a brief moment, she forgot the cold stares, the accusations, the biting words passed off as concern. In the mirror, she saw herself not as they wanted to reduce her to, but as she truly was, radiant, composed, present. She stepped out of the fitting room, back straight, holding the front of the dress lightly with one hand, as she walked toward the mirror near the center of the boutique. The floor was quiet again, the tension still there, lingering in corners, but no one spoke as she walked. The woman in the lavender coat hadn't moved far. She stood off to the side, watching like a hawk forced to wait. Amara stood before the larger mirror, turning just slightly, letting the light fall across the gown. Her face was unreadable, but the soft nod she gave herself was enough. This was the one. "I'll take it," she said quietly, not looking at anyone in particular. Carly stepped out from behind the counter, a little too quick, a little too eager now that the storm she feared hadn't passed, only thickened. She nodded stiffly, the corners of her mouth trying for a smile, but never making it past the weight of her own discomfort. But before Amara could step forward, movement flashed from the side. "I'll take that one." The words rang out with sharpness, cutting across the boutique with a forced lightness that couldn't hide its edge. Linda Worthington, still standing by the chairs, still pretending she was just another patron, stepped forward with a practiced air, her voice rising an octave, sugary with artificial charm. "I've had my eye on that dress since I walked in. It's a bit too mature for a teenager anyway." Amara turned toward her slowly, the expression on her face not of disbelief, but of expectation. She had known this woman couldn't stand the idea of her winning, of her walking out with dignity and something beautiful draped across her shoulders. Carly hesitated. "I'm sorry, but she—" Amara began, but stopped as Carly turned toward the older woman with an awkward laugh, like they were old acquaintances, bonded by some unspoken familiarity. "Well, technically, it hasn't been purchased yet," Carly said, glancing at Amara, her voice laced with tension. "And Mrs. Worthington is a long-time client. I'm sure we can have another one ordered for you, if it's still in stock." Amara stared at her, a beat too long. "You saw me walk out of the fitting room," she said, the words deliberate and measured. "You saw me pick it out, try it on, and say I wanted to buy it." Carly shifted slightly, visibly uncomfortable. "I know, and I understand, but she did express interest just now. And we don't usually—" "She didn't want it until I wore it," Amara said, her voice rising only enough to press the point without ever breaking composure. "This isn't about the dress, and you know it." Linda smiled then, not warmly, but with the quiet satisfaction of someone reclaiming stolen ground. She took another step forward, her fingers extending as if to brush the gown, as if she might just pluck it from Amara's body if she was bold enough. "I'll be taking it," she said simply, and Carly didn't move to stop her. Amara stepped back once, holding the fabric at her side, and looked directly at Carly. "You're really going to let her take this off me?" Carly's mouth opened, but no words came. Amara didn't wait. She turned her head slowly, calmly, toward the front of the store, and as if the air itself shifted with her, the boutique's front door opened with a muted ding. Malcolm Daniels entered the boutique with the kind of presence that made everything else still. He didn't speak right away. He didn't have to. His eyes swept the room in one glance, catching his daughter standing in a gown, facing two white women, one smug, the other silent. The boutique door eased shut behind him, but the air inside didn't move. It just tightened, thickening around the silence that followed the soft chime of the entrance bell. Malcolm Daniels stood just past the threshold, not rushing, not looking around with wild urgency. He simply stepped forward with that same slow, deliberate presence that always made people stand up straighter without realizing they had. His coat still buttoned, his shoulders broad beneath it, his eyes calm but unblinking. Carly's head lifted immediately, her lips parting with a practiced smile that faltered halfway when she registered the way he scanned the room. She didn't recognize him, but something about the way he moved made her still her hands. Only Amara remained unmoved. She turned slightly, her chin lifting, not as a cry for help, not to introduce him, but as a signal that he was exactly who he needed to be in that moment. Nothing more, nothing less. Linda, however, took a single glance at him and laughed. Short, dismissive, forced through her nose like she was swatting away a fly. "Oh, good," she said. "You brought backup. Charming. But unless he's here to carry your bag or pay for the dress, I'm not sure why we're entertaining guests." Malcolm's eyes moved past her without pause. He stepped toward his daughter. "You all right?" Amara nodded, her voice clear. "I'm fine. But you should probably hear what happened before she spins it her way." "I don't need to spin anything," Linda cut in, voice rising just enough to reclaim space. "Your daughter came in here pretending to shop, wouldn't let anyone help her. And then, when I, quite reasonably, suggested caution, she made a scene. Then she tried to claim a dress she hadn't paid for just because she tried it on. I've been shopping here longer than she's been alive. Malcolm tilted his head, but he didn't look at Linda. He looked at Amara. Start from the beginning, he said. Amara didn't hesitate. She didn't rush, either. Her tone didn't waver. I walked in. I looked at the dresses. No one welcomed me, but I didn't care. I wasn't here for small talk. She, Amara gestured toward Linda, started following me, hovering, making comments about prices and how people should be careful with the merchandise. I ignored it. Linda scoffed, but Amara continued without glancing at her. Then she accused me, without evidence, of stealing, told the manager to check my bag. Carly didn't do it, but she told me I should probably leave to avoid confusion. I told her I wasn't going anywhere, and called you. Malcolm nodded once, still quiet. I saw this dress, tried it on, came out, and said I wanted to buy it. Amara went on, her voice sharpening now, but not rising. Then Linda over there tried to snatch it, claimed she wanted it first and told Carly to give it to her instead. She didn't even ask for it until Amara had it on. The younger sales associate murmured from across the boutique, almost too soft to hear, but no one acknowledged it. Linda stepped forward with a brittle smile. Is this really the direction we're going? Having Daddy come in and fight your little battles? I was giving her a lesson in manners. Something she clearly needs. Now Malcolm turned, and when he did, the air stilled even more. She doesn't need you for manners, he said, voice still calm, but colder now. She knows how to carry herself. She didn't shout. She didn't argue. She told me what happened, clearly, without drama. Linda folded her arms. Well, maybe if she made it clearer who she was with, this misunderstanding wouldn't have happened. I assumed. That's the problem, Malcolm said. You assumed. I assumed she wasn't here to buy anything, Linda snapped, now louder, less polished. And I was right, wasn't I? You're the one footing the bill. If she wanted to be taken seriously, maybe she should have walked in here with someone respectable instead of, she walked in here, Malcolm said, cutting her off with a suddenness that halted her mid-sentence, expecting to be treated like any other customer. Not because of who she's with, not because of her last name, because she's a human being in a store. Linda's mouth opened, but Malcolm didn't stop. And now you're standing here, trying to justify why you tried to rip a dress off a teenager like you were entitled to it. Like your money, your history with the store. Your opinion somehow outweighed her dignity. Carly looked down, her fingers curling around the edge of the counter. Malcolm turned to her now. Is that how you run this place? Carly's voice barely escaped. I didn't know what to do. You didn't need to know what to do, he said. You just needed to do the right thing. And instead, you did nothing. Linda scoffed again, louder now, like a kettle boiling over. You act like you're royalty. What are you? A lawyer? A politician? I've never even heard of you. That's not surprising, Malcolm said, because I don't make noise to be heard. I make moves that change the room. Linda rolled her eyes. You're all the same. Come in here with your attitude and your entitlement and expect the world to bend. I expect decency, Malcolm said, which clearly wasn't on display today. Then he looked back at his daughter. You still want the dress? Amara nodded once. I do. Malcolm turned to Carly. Then ring it up. Now. Linda sputtered, furious. You can't just walk in here and give orders like you own the place. Malcolm looked at her, and this time he smiled. I don't yet. And just like that, the silence turned electric. Linda Worthington didn't move. She stood frozen in place, arms crossed so tightly over her chest that the fabric of her coat bunched at the shoulders. Her jaw clenched in a way that suggested restraint, not from regret, but from rage, curdling just beneath her skin. Her eyes darted from Amara to Malcolm, her mouth twitching as though she wanted to say something, but every word she rehearsed died before it could form. Amara didn't spare her a glance. She stood beside her father, emerald dress still hugging her frame, her expression serene, deliberate, composed, and entirely unbothered by the heat still radiating from the woman behind her. She didn't need to gloat. The truth had already spoken for her, and she wore it now like armor, shining beneath the boutique's warm light. Carly stood stiffly behind the counter, pale and visibly shaken, her hands hovering just above the register keys, as if the simple task of ringing up a sale had become a negotiation with gravity itself. Her gaze flicked to Linda, then quickly away, landing on Malcolm with cautious expectation. "The dress is—" she began, but the words came out dry, barely above a whisper. She cleared her throat and tried again. "The dress is $2,200. Malcolm pulled a black leather card holder from his coat and laid it on the counter with practiced ease. He didn't ask for a discount. He didn't blink at the price. He didn't ask if the dress came with a bag or a receipt or a guarantee. He simply placed the card down and waited, his posture silent but commanding. And the message was clear. No more conversation, no more debate, no more delay. Carly processed the payment quickly, her hands fumbling only once, and then placed the dress into a protective garment bag with reverent precision. She avoided everyone's eyes, especially Amara's, and slid the receipt across the counter like a quiet apology wrapped in thermal paper. "Thank you," she said, but it barely made it past her lips. Malcolm took the garment bag and handed it to his daughter without looking away from Linda, who still hadn't moved from her spot. Her arms crossed tighter now, her expression contorted into a smug, defensive smile. "Enjoy your moment," she said, voice laced with venom wrapped in sugar. "You've had your little victory, but you don't scare me." Malcolm stepped forward once, not aggressively, not even forcefully, but with the weight of someone who knew that power, when wielded correctly, didn't need to announce itself to be understood. "We're not here to scare you," he said calmly. "That would imply you're worth the effort." Her nostrils flared, but he didn't stop. "This moment," he continued, voice steady and quiet, "isn't for you to understand. It's not about changing your mind or earning your respect. People like you believe they're untouchable, that the world belongs to them, and everyone else needs permission just to breathe beside them. And you're wrong, but you're too far gone to see it." Linda's smile widened, but it had lost its edges. It sat on her face like something desperate trying to pretend it still had control. "You've had your little performance," she said, each word laced with mockery. "You can go now. I'm sure the story will play wonderfully online if that's what this was all about. But me, I'll still be here next week. Still shopping. Still welcome. Nothing changes." Amara tilted her head, her voice soft but cutting. "You really think that?" Linda's smirk didn't falter. "I know it." Malcolm leaned forward just slightly, his tone still conversational. "This isn't the last time you'll see us." She narrowed her eyes. "Is that a threat?" "No," he said. "That's a promise." Linda turned away then, dismissively, with the kind of exaggerated exhale meant to show disinterest. But the tension in her shoulders betrayed her. She didn't like not knowing. She didn't like feeling that the room had shifted, and she hadn't been told how. She didn't like being looked at the way she had looked at others, like a problem politely waiting to be dealt with. Malcolm didn't watch her any longer. He turned toward his daughter and gently rested a hand on her back as they made their way toward the door. Amara walked ahead, head held high, the dress bag slung over her shoulder like a banner of grace wrapped in strength. Neither of them looked back. The boutique remained still as they passed through its heart, but the silence was no longer peaceful. It was thick with aftershocks, the echo of things broken beneath the surface, of rules rewritten without anyone needing to say them out loud. Carly didn't speak. The young sales associate who had watched everything unfold from the sidelines pressed her lips together as if holding in something she wished she'd had the courage to say earlier. The boutique door opened with a soft chime, and for a moment, all Linda could do was stand there, alone now, with no one rushing to reassure her, no one leaping to defend her. She watched them go, her arms still crossed, her expression still smug, but the faintest twitch at the corner of her jaw betrayed the truth. She wasn't nearly as unmoved as she wanted to be, and when the door closed behind them, when the boutique returned to its curated stillness, there was no applause, No allies. Just quiet, heavy, and telling. Outside, Amara walked beside her father without saying a word for a full block. Then she finally looked over at him, the corner of her mouth lifting just slightly. "You didn't tell her who you were," she said. "She didn't earn that," he replied. They kept walking. The car ride was quiet, not out of awkwardness, but from the kind of shared silence that wrapped around them like something sacred. Something neither of them wanted to disturb just yet. Amara sat in the passenger seat, the emerald gown folded neatly in her lap, her hands resting lightly on the garment bag as she watched the city roll past the tinted windows. Outside, pedestrians drifted in and out of shops. Taxis honked lazily through intersections, and the boutique they had just left faded into the distance like something unremarkable. Just another luxury storefront on a street lined with polished glass and curated beauty. But for Amara, it hadn't faded. It lingered, not as trauma, but as something colder, quieter, a bruise beneath the surface, not yet visible but already pulsing. Malcolm kept one hand on the wheel, the other resting on the console between them, his gaze steady on the road. He didn't speak, not because he didn't have words, but because he knew his daughter needed space. And Amara, for all her poise and self-assurance, hadn't said much since they stepped outside. It wasn't her silence that worried him. It was the stillness behind it. It wasn't the first time she'd been profiled, and they both knew it wouldn't be the last. But this one had been different. This one hadn't happened in a school hallway or on a street corner. It had happened in a boutique designed for elegance, exclusivity, and power. And the message had been clear: you may walk like you belong, but we still see you as something to be watched. "I wasn't going to leave," Amara said at last, her voice quiet but clear. Not after she said what she said. Not when Carly just stood there. Malcolm nodded once, not taking his eyes off the road. "I know. She wanted me to shrink," Amara continued. "Make me feel like I didn't deserve to be there. Like I was borrowing someone else's world. And you didn't let her," he said, his voice calm but firm. "You stayed. You looked her in the eye. You made her confront the truth." She didn't respond right away. Her gaze lingered on the skyline ahead, where the buildings stretched high and proud, glass and steel glittering beneath the afternoon sun. Eventually, she exhaled slowly and leaned her head against the window. "I'm just tired of it always being a test," she said. "Like I have to prove, every time, that I'm allowed to exist in places they think I shouldn't." Malcolm glanced at her then, just for a moment, before turning his eyes back to the road. "You don't need to prove anything to anyone," he said. "Not anymore. Now it's time they prove something to you." She looked at him, her brow furrowing slightly. "What do you mean?" But he didn't answer. Not yet. They pulled into the underground garage of his office tower, the security gate rising with a soft hum before closing behind them. The car's engine shut off, and the silence returned. Not tense, not heavy, just waiting. "Come upstairs," he said. "Just for a minute." Amara followed him through the private elevator entrance, still holding the dress bag, though her steps had grown slower now, her curiosity beginning to peek through the haze of frustration that had lingered since the boutique. The elevator carried them to the top floor, where floor-to-ceiling windows framed the city like a living painting, and the office's design was as quiet and composed as the man who occupied it. No clutter, no loud colors, only precision and intention in every corner. He walked to his desk, pressed a few keys on a wireless keyboard, and waited until the monitor lit up. Then he dialed a number from memory. Amara stood nearby, watching. "Yes, this is Daniels," he said into the phone, his tone shifting. Not louder, but sharper now, deliberate and clipped. "I need you to schedule a call with Renner, Hamilton, and Brooks tomorrow morning. Add Lillian from Acquisitions. Tell them it's urgent." He paused. "And find out who owns the building where Vela sits. The boutique. I want a full portfolio by the end of the day." Amara blinked. "Wait, what are you doing?" Malcolm looked at her calmly, then leaned back in his chair. "Taking my time," he said. "Making sure the next time she sees us, It won't be on her terms. Amara's eyes widened slightly, not in shock, but in the slow realization that the story wasn't over. Not just emotionally, not just personally, but structurally. Her father wasn't just angry. He was already thinking 3 steps ahead. The kind of response Linda would never see coming because she'd never imagined her actions carried consequences. Not when they came from someone like her. "You're really doing this," Amara said softly. "I told her it wasn't the last time she'd see us," he replied, folding his hands together. "And I meant it." She didn't smile, but the tightness around her shoulders loosened. Good. The day after the boutique incident unfolded behind the silence of glass walls and velvet hangers, Malcolm Daniels sat in his office overlooking the city, not with anger simmering beneath his skin, but with something colder. Intent sharpened to a point. There was no press release, no posturing, no social media outrage. There were only quiet calls, firm directives, and a stack of reports waiting on his desk, each one shedding more light on the boutique and the crumbling structure that supported it. Amara sat nearby, her legs tucked under her, as she scrolled through fabric samples on her tablet. She hadn't spoken much that morning, but she didn't need to. Her presence was enough. She had already fought the first battle. Her father would handle the rest. "I want a clean chain of ownership," Malcolm said without looking up. "No gaps, no licensing intermediaries. If there's a lease, I want the terms. If there's a silent partner, I want a name. I don't care how pretty they dressed it up. I want the foundation stripped bare." His assistant, seated across the desk, nodded quickly and jotted notes without asking questions. Everyone in the office had heard his tone shift after that call from the boutique. There was no announcement of war, just a change in air pressure. He waited until the assistant left before speaking again, his voice softer now. "I don't like being predictable." Amara looked up from the tablet, one brow raised. "You think she's still bragging to her friends?" Malcolm gave the faintest of nods. "She probably thinks she handled it, that her reputation protected her. And Carly? She's probably hoping we've already forgotten." Amara leaned back slightly, letting the tablet rest on the couch beside her. "You're not going to forget, are you?" It wasn't a question. It was a statement. Steady. Knowing. "No," he said simply. He crossed the room and picked up a folder that had arrived just minutes before. Inside was the full ownership profile of the property that housed the boutique. A narrow LLC with 2 passive investors and a managing partner who owned several other retail locations, each one bleeding money slowly under the illusion of luxury. Vela, it turned out, was not as untouchable as its glass displays pretended to be. It had problems, slipping margins, unpaid vendors, a silent churn of staff turnover that hadn't made it to the surface yet. Malcolm closed the folder slowly. "They're behind on 2 of their wholesale payments," he said aloud, not really for Amara, but to hear it himself. "And their 4th quarter projections are lower than last year's. So they're vulnerable," Amara said, catching on. "They're available," he corrected. "They just don't know it yet." He made another call that afternoon. Short, direct, and impersonal. "I want a conversation scheduled with the managing partner," he said. No mention of what happened. No names. Just interest from an investor looking to add retail real estate to his portfolio. We keep it clean. As the hours passed, the foundation of Vela began to shake. Not from scandal, but from something far quieter. Due diligence, financial pressure, the knowledge that the boutique was not a fortress, but a facade wrapped in fragrance and fabric. And beneath it all, cracks had already begun to show. Meanwhile, across the city, inside that same boutique where the world still smelled like rosewater and whispered judgment, Carly stood behind the counter and tried not to think about the man who had walked in like a storm in still air. She tried not to wonder why he hadn't yelled, why he hadn't threatened, why he'd simply paid for the dress and walked out after saying just enough to leave her nerves humming like wires stretched too tight. But she hadn't forgotten. Not the look in his eyes, not the words he'd left behind. "This isn't the last time you'll see us." Linda had come in again that morning, acting as though nothing had happened. She'd asked If a new shipment had arrived, complained about the parking, complimented a scarf she didn't plan to buy, she was smiling too much, talking too loud, as if trying to re-establish herself by sheer force of presence. Carly had nodded along, responded politely, but her stomach hadn't stopped tightening since that man's eyes had settled on hers. She didn't know who he was, but she knew, deeply, undeniably, that he was someone. Someone who had already moved past fury and into something far more dangerous. Resolution. And the worst part was, he hadn't said anything publicly, which meant whatever was coming, she wouldn't see it until it was already inside the walls. Back in his office, Malcolm sat with his sleeves rolled, the day winding down, but his mind already a week ahead. "I'm not going to fire them," he said suddenly. Amara looked up. "Who?" "The manager, the woman, anyone else involved. That would be too easy, too satisfying for them." She frowned, unsure. "So, what are you going to do?" "I'm going to change the locks," he said, "and then let them decide whether they still recognize the building when I'm done." Amara didn't speak. She only smiled faintly, letting the silence stretch between them as the city lights outside flickered on one by one. The deal closed on a Thursday morning, quiet and clean, in a private office overlooking the east end of the city. No one from the boutique was present. There were no champagne toasts, no ceremonial handshakes, no marketing rollouts or social announcements. Just a thin stack of paper, a silent wire transfer, and the final flourish of Malcolm Daniels's signature sliding across a dotted line that ended with him owning the space that once refused to see his daughter. He didn't rush. He never did. He read every clause, every footnote, every coded piece of language designed to favor the old owners. He removed them. The managing partner had hesitated only once, when the offer was placed in front of him, higher than expected, but paired with a firm expiration. "You're moving fast," the man had said. "I'm moving precisely," Malcolm replied. And that had been the end of it. By noon, he was walking the boutique floor, not as a customer, not as an outsider, but as the man who now owned the deed, the shelves, the registers, the air they breathed when they opened their mouths to speak. Still, he didn't wear it loudly. No announcements, no flashing name tags. He entered the space like he had the first time, quietly, dressed in slate gray, his steps steady, deliberate. No one recognized him immediately. They wouldn't. That was part of the design. Carly looked up from the register, saw him, and for a moment her eyes flickered. Not with full recognition, but with a shadow of memory that made her pause. He walked the floor slowly, glancing at displays, running a finger along the edge of a marble-topped table near the entrance. He stopped at the same rack Amara had approached the week before. The same rack Linda Worthington had circled like a predator, guarding territory she never owned. Carly cleared her throat. "Can I help you with something, sir?" He turned toward her, his expression unreadable, his eyes calm. "Actually," he said, "you can." She straightened slightly, tucking a strand of hair behind one ear. "Are you looking for something specific?" "I'm looking for the store manager," he said. "Carly, I believe." She froze, only for a second before nodding. "That's me." He nodded once, eyes steady. "You'll need to gather your team. I'd like a word. Office, please." She blinked. Sorry. Are you?" He didn't answer, not with words, only with a slight inclination of his head and a look that made the back of her neck stiffen. She turned without another question and disappeared behind the frosted glass partition, returning moments later with the other two employees trailing her. One still clutching a notepad, the other glancing between Malcolm and Carly like she sensed something unfolding but didn't yet understand the shape of it. They filed into the small back office, cramped and overly perfumed, with stacks of lookbooks and half-sorted paperwork along the walls. Malcolm entered last, closing the door gently behind him, sealing the room with a finality that felt like a shift in pressure. He remained standing. "I won't take much of your time," he began, his voice calm, deliberate, and low enough to force them to lean slightly forward to catch every word. As of this morning, Vela's property and operations fall under new ownership. Carly blinked. The other two looked at one another. "And you are?" she asked, her voice already beginning to hollow. "The new owner," he said. He let the silence stretch after that. Not to gloat, not to threaten, but simply to let them feel it. Let the words find their place in the room and take root. Carly swallowed hard, her eyes darting to the others, then back to him. "I wasn't informed." "You are now," Malcolm replied. One of the employees, the younger one, shifted uncomfortably. The other said nothing. "I've read your records," Malcolm continued. "I know the sales figures. I know who your vendors are. I know who left quietly in the last 6 months and who stayed. I know what happened last week, and I know how long it took for anyone to step in. So let's skip the part where we pretend this is a surprise." The silence thickened. "I'm not here to fire anyone," he said, voice still level. "That's not how I operate. But things will change. The hiring process, the customer experience, the leadership structure. There will be new expectations. You'll receive a full transition packet before the end of the day. You'll review it. You'll sign it. Or you'll step aside." Carly opened her mouth, as if to protest, but no words came. She only nodded, slowly, lips parting, then closing again. "I won't be managing the day-to-day," Malcolm added, "but I'll be watching closely." He looked at each of them, one by one, letting the weight of that linger, not as a threat, but as a promise. "And if anyone asks who I am," he said, "you tell them this. I'm the man who remembered." He turned, opened the door, and stepped out, leaving them in the stillness of a room no longer theirs. They met that evening at Malcolm's penthouse, the city humming far below the wraparound windows as dusk settled in with a wash of deep lavender and gold. The lights were low, casting long shadows across the living room floor, and the only sound was the quiet clink of ice settling in a glass of water that Amara held between her palms, untouched. She sat curled at the edge of the couch, her eyes fixed on the skyline, but her mind somewhere else entirely. Malcolm stood across from her, jacket off, sleeves rolled, a file open on the table beside him, a newly printed roster, fresh vendor contracts, a revised layout for the boutique's front end. She hadn't said much when he told her the sale had closed. Just one quiet nod, a small lift at the corner of her mouth. She didn't need to say more. She had already seen the beginning of it in his eyes days ago. And now that he owned the place, the question had shifted from why to how far. "You've never been the type to gloat," she said finally, her voice even. "So, what happens next?" Malcolm looked up. "That depends on how you want to handle it." She turned to face him, brow raised. "Me? This started with you," he said. "And it should end with you. I've made my moves. The foundation is mine now. But what happens when she walks through those doors again, that's yours to decide." Amara looked away again, the gears already moving in her mind. Not with vengeance, not with rage, but with something sharper. Linda Worthington had dismissed her like an insect, tried to shame her, tried to steal her voice and her space. She hadn't flinched then. She wouldn't now. "She'll come back," Amara said. "She's the kind who always does." Entitled, "People Don't Know How to Stay Gone. They assume their welcome is permanent." Malcolm nodded once. "And when she does?" Amara leaned back, letting the silence stretch before she answered. "She should see me first." His gaze sharpened slightly. "What do you have in mind?" "I want to be there," she said, "on the floor, working, polished, poised, unmistakable. I want her to walk in thinking everything's gone back to normal, her little kingdom untouched, and I want her to realize that I'm not just shopping this time. I am the store now." Malcolm didn't smile, but something in his posture softened. He sat down across from her, clasping his hands lightly together. "Then you'll be there. Part-time. Quiet at first. Let her arrogance carry her through the front door one more time. And then," he paused, "then you tell her she's no longer welcome." Amara looked down at the glass in her hands, then set it gently on the table. "Do you think she'll even recognize me at first?" She'll recognize the posture, he said, the confidence, and when she hears your voice, there won't be any doubt. Amara nodded slowly, her mind already weaving the moment together. Her, in sleek black, name tag pinned high, hair pulled back sharp, standing behind the front counter with the full authority of someone no longer asking for permission. The same mirror where she'd once held that emerald gown would reflect her now as part of the foundation, not just a visitor. Linda would walk in expecting a warm greeting, maybe even a new shipment of scarves waiting for her usual approval. And instead, she'd see Amara. She'd blink, she'd frown, she'd try to place her. And just when the recognition would settle across her face like sour wine, Amara would speak. "Mrs. Worthington, I'm afraid you've been banned from this location. Ownership decision. We reserve the right to refuse service." "She won't go quietly," Malcolm said. "I don't need her to," Amara replied. "I just need her to understand that she's not welcome anymore, and that she never was." He leaned back, watching her. There was no glee in her tone, no edge of revenge, only clarity, only purpose. "Do you want me there?" "No," she said. "I want her to think I'm the one holding the power, because I am." He nodded again. "You start next week," he said. "We'll keep your name off the paperwork. I've already made arrangements. You'll report directly to a new floor manager, someone vetted, someone who understands why you're there." Amara smiled then, slow and sure. "And the others? They'll adapt," he said. "Or they'll leave." She stood, crossed the room to where the city stretched below her like a living current, and placed one hand against the glass. "I'm not doing this to teach her a lesson," she said. "She won't learn. People like that never do." "I know. I'm doing it because she thinks she still owns the space," Amara continued, voice quiet. "And I want her to feel, if only once, what it means to be shut out." Malcolm stepped beside her, silent for a moment as he looked out at the streets below. "She won't forget it," he said. "I don't need her to." She turned then, calm and ready, a reflection of the same quiet resolve her father had carried through every boardroom battle and closed-door negotiation. But this wasn't his fight anymore. It was hers. The boutique carried a different weight now, one not seen in the marble floors or velvet-lined racks, but in the silence that followed Amara everywhere she walked. Customers smiled politely, staff moved a little more carefully, and Carly, who once stood behind the counter with the quiet confidence of routine, now avoided the front altogether during Amara's hours. There was no announcement, no explanation, but everyone understood that something beneath the surface had shifted. Amara arrived early each morning, her uniform crisp, her posture effortless. She greeted each guest without strain, moved with ease through the space, and always knew when to step forward and when to watch. She was the constant now, the center of a room that once tried to push her out. And then, on a Thursday just past noon, Linda Worthington returned. The door chimed softly as it always did, but Amara felt it before she saw her. That particular rhythm of heels across polished tile, that sharp perfume with its cold floral bite, it was unmistakable. Linda swept in like she owned the oxygen, her winter white coat fluttering behind her, her scarf knotted with exaggerated care, her expression already preparing for pleasantries she never meant. She didn't glance around. She didn't hesitate. She walked straight toward the rear of the boutique, where a new selection of scarves hung in delicate silks and moody florals, and reached for one with a familiar, presumptive hand. That's when she saw her. Amara stood behind the counter, poised and composed, dressed in sharp black with her hair pulled into a clean, high knot. Her name tag glinted under the soft lights. Linda paused mid-reach, fingers frozen on a violet scarf, her eyes narrowing slightly as she turned her head. A beat passed. Then came the smile, tight-lipped, slow, smug, the kind of smile that said she recognized her and thought the moment belonged to her anyway. "Well," Linda said with false warmth, "isn't this something?" Amara didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her presence was the response. Linda stepped closer, her hands clasped before her like a gracious host preparing for a lecture. Working here now? I must admit, I'm a little surprised. Not quite what I imagined for someone so spirited. Still, Amara said nothing. Linda laughed softly, as though she'd made a clever joke. But I suppose it's character building. Learning the value of service, structure, respect. I hope you're taking notes this time around. Carly, folding scarves near the front, suddenly dropped one to the floor. She bent down quickly to retrieve it, but didn't look up again. Linda reached for the same scarf once more, lifted it, and held it to her neck. I assume you're not the one I need to speak to about purchasing. Amara spoke then, her voice measured, cool, and unmistakably clear. Actually, you do. Linda blinked, slowly. I'm sorry? Amara's gaze didn't waver. You'll have to speak with me. I'm the one in charge of floor operations. Linda let out a dry laugh, sharp and ugly. Please, let's not pretend you've been promoted to more than display duties. I'm sure there's a manager on site who understands how these things work. I understand exactly how these things work, Amara said calmly, her voice even. And I'm telling you now, you're not welcome here. Linda's smile faltered. Amara continued, quiet but firm. You've been banned from this location, per directive, from ownership. The words hung in the air, cold and precise. Linda stared at her for a long moment, blinking once, then twice. And when she finally spoke, the heat beneath her tone betrayed the calm smile she tried to wear. You can't be serious. I am. You're banning me? Yes. Linda's laugh came out louder now, her voice tinged with something between disbelief and outrage. This is ridiculous. Is this personal? Because if so, I'll be taking this up with the owner directly. I don't know what little story you've spun for yourself, but you don't have that kind of authority. Amara didn't blink. I have exactly that kind of authority. Linda stepped forward, too close now, her tone low but pointed. Let me be clear. I've been shopping here since you were still in diapers. I know this place. I know everyone here. You're a temporary fixture, a statement, a stunt. You'll disappear just as quickly as you arrived. Amara didn't move. And yet, I'm the one standing here, asking you to leave. Is this some kind of punishment? Linda snapped. For putting you in your place last time? Because if you think I'm going to stand here and be ordered around by a child, you're not being ordered, Amara said, her voice still calm, still slow. You're being informed. Linda's eyes narrowed. Then inform me where your manager is. I'm right here. I want to speak to the owner. Amara paused, her head tilting slightly. He doesn't take walk-ins. The words landed like glass against stone, delicate and shattering all at once. Linda stared at her, suddenly unsure of her footing, the edges of her arrogance cracking as something inside her began to recognize that the rules had changed, and no one had bothered to warn her. But she didn't back down. Not yet. Instead, she straightened her coat, adjusted her scarf, and smiled again. Forced now, tight and trembling around the edges. Well, she said, we'll just see about that, won't we? And Amara, steady as ever, simply nodded. Yes, she said, we will. For a brief moment, the boutique went still. So still that even the gentle instrumental music playing overhead felt out of place, like it didn't belong in the room anymore. Linda stood facing Amara, lips parted just slightly, as though a retort were still forming behind her teeth. Though none came, she blinked slowly, once, then again, eyes sweeping the store like she was looking for an exit, a witness, someone who would step in and say, this had all been a mistake. Her gaze landed on Carly. The manager stood at the far end of the room near a folding station, her posture rigid, her expression unreadable. She had been there the whole time, watching, listening, not daring to step between them. But now, as Linda turned and marched toward her, heels snapping sharply with every step, it became clear that she was Carly's last hope of reclaiming some control over the situation. You, Linda said, her voice brittle but rising fast. I want to speak with you. Now. Carly didn't move, Her hands still halfway through folding a silk blouse she hadn't really been looking at. Her eyes lifted slowly to meet Linda's. "I want to know exactly what's going on," Linda continued, her voice sharpening. "Because I've been coming here for over 2 decades, and never, not once, have I been spoken to like that. You let that girl stand behind the counter and humiliate me, and you said nothing." Carly opened her mouth, closed it again. She looked behind Linda, toward Amara, then back. "I asked you a question," Linda snapped. "Has this store completely lost its mind?" Carly took a slow breath, then set the blouse down with careful precision, her fingers brushing a crease flat that didn't need smoothing. "We have new ownership," she said at last. Linda stared at her. "What does that have to do with anything?" Carly didn't answer immediately. She glanced once more toward Amara, who had returned behind the counter and now stood there, tall, poised, hands folded neatly in front of her. The same girl Linda had tried to humiliate, the one she had once accused of theft, now unshaken and quietly radiant beneath the boutique lights. Carly looked back at Linda, and the words came more firmly this time. The store was sold. A full acquisition. The papers were signed last week. Linda narrowed her eyes. "To who?" Carly hesitated, then dropped the final weight. "Malcolm Daniels." The name dropped like stone through glass. Elegant, clean, and absolutely shattering. Linda blinked, once, then scoffed, though the sound came out awkward and dry. "Who?" Amara's voice carried gently from across the room, calm as always. "My father." Linda turned, slowly, as though her own spine had gone stiff from the realization. She looked at Amara again, truly looked, and this time it was as if she were seeing her for the first time. Not just the uniform or the posture or the calm command, but the fullness of who she had been all along. The girl she had dismissed wasn't just standing behind a counter. She stood on a foundation her family now owned. Linda's laugh came out thin, humorless. "No, that's ridiculous." Carly didn't argue. "It's a stunt," Linda insisted. "He's doing this to make a point, to embarrass me. This isn't permanent." Carly didn't respond. Linda turned back to Amara, who remained still, her chin high. "This is all performative," she said, as if trying to convince herself. "It's theater. You're not going to last behind that counter. People like you burn bright, then disappear. Always. And yet," Amara said softly, "here I am, still standing, while you're the one being asked to leave." The silence that followed was the kind that didn't just fall. It settled deep, pressing into the corners of the room, into the shelves and the folded scarves, and the shifting glances of the 2 other associates standing nearby. No one rushed to defend Linda. No one offered a lifeline. For the first time since she entered, Linda looked around and saw that no one stood beside her. "You think this changes anything?" she asked, her voice lower now, bitter and trembling. "I don't need it to change you," Amara said. "I just need it to remind you that your time deciding who belongs is over." Linda took a breath, held it, then exhaled through clenched teeth. "I'll be speaking to my attorney." Amara didn't flinch. "Please do. But I'd advise you to check the property records first." It wasn't a threat. It was a courtesy. Linda stared at her for a moment longer, her face blank but her hands tight around the strap of her handbag. And then, finally, she turned. Not with grace, not with dignity, just sharp, uneven steps across the tile. Her heels no longer a declaration of power, but an echo, fading behind her. She didn't say goodbye, didn't slam the door. She simply walked out, and the boutique didn't feel empty without her. It felt cleaner. The door closed behind Linda with a soft click, a sound so quiet it almost didn't seem worthy of what it represented. But the silence that followed was not empty. It was thick with what had just unfolded, with the tension that had finally snapped, with the final collapse of a power structure no one had dared name until it was already broken. For a long moment, no one moved. Carly stood by the register, her fingers gently gripping the edge of the counter, her knuckles pale against the glass. Her eyes were distant, not fixed on anything in particular, but clearly seeing everything that had just passed through the room. Her eyes were distant, not fixed on anything in particular, but clearly seeing everything that had just passed through the room. She had been silent again, but this time there was no ambiguity in her posture, no illusion of control left to cling to. Amara remained behind the counter, her shoulders square, her gaze steady on the boutique floor as the soft hum of overhead music resumed, as if it hadn't just played through a reckoning. After a few long breaths, Carly slowly made her way over, her steps light but deliberate, her eyes never quite meeting Amara's until she reached the other side of the counter and stopped. "You handled that," Carly said at last, her voice low, tentative. "I don't think I've ever seen anyone hold the floor like that." Amara didn't smile. She didn't soften. She simply looked at Carly, her expression unreadable but not cold, just still, like the surface of deep water. "I've had practice," she said quietly. Carly nodded, her hands now folded in front of her, thumbs rubbing against one another as she searched for words. "I didn't know what to say," she added. "I mean, when it happened the first time, I froze." Amara didn't rush her response. She let Carly sit in the discomfort, in the silence that felt far heavier than any words would have. "I noticed," she said. Carly exhaled. "I didn't mean to choose a side. She was loud and insistent. And she's been a regular for years. And that made her right?" The question wasn't sharp, but it landed like a bell rung in a quiet room. Carly looked down, shame flickering across her face. "No," she admitted. "It didn't." Amara leaned slightly against the counter now, not relaxing, but grounding herself in the space. "She wasn't the only one who made me feel small that day. You didn't raise your voice. You didn't make a scene. You just stood there, and that silence said everything she needed it to." Carly looked up, eyes shining faintly, but no tears falling. "I know. I've thought about it every day since. I've played it over in my head 100 times. What I should have said, how I should have handled it." Amara nodded once, slow and steady. "Then don't just think about it. Change it." "I want to," Carly said quickly. "I do. I want to be better. I know I don't get a clean slate, and I'm not asking for one, but I don't want to be the person who watches something like that happen and does nothing ever again." Amara studied her for a long moment, the silence between them stretching but not growing colder. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about punishment anymore. It was about recognition, naming what happened and refusing to let it stay buried beneath good intentions. "I don't need you to prove anything to me," Amara said. "But if you're going to stay here, you need to understand what kind of place this has to become." "I do," Carly said. "I will." "No more neutrality," Amara said. "Not when it comes to who feels safe here. Not when people like her try to assert control. And not when people like me walk through the door." Carly nodded again, more firmly now. "You have my word." Amara tilted her head slightly. "Your word means nothing if it doesn't show up in the room with you." "I know," Carly said, "but I'm going to learn. You deserve that. The customers deserve that. The staff deserves that. And I do too." The words weren't perfect, but they were honest. And Amara, who had waited long enough to be seen fully, didn't give forgiveness in return. She gave direction. "We're rebuilding this space," she said. "Not just from the floor plan, from the inside out. The culture, the energy, the way people walk in and know they're not being measured before they speak." Carly gave a small, breathless laugh. "You sound like you're already running the place." Amara looked out across the boutique. The displays glimmered softly. The air was calm again, but no longer fragile. It felt intentional now, claimed. "I'm not running it," she said, "but I know what it should be." Carly smiled, tentative, not looking for approval, just relief at being given a path forward. "I'm listening," she said. "Then that's where we start." They stood together in the quiet, the floor beneath them now belonging not to old systems or stale loyalties, but to something newly rooted, not perfect, but possible. The office was quieter than usual when Amara stepped inside. The sun had dipped lower now, the skyline glowing in dusky gold as it stretched across the glass wall behind her father's desk. The soft ticking of the old brass clock echoed faintly in the background, and for a few seconds the room felt more like a sanctuary than a war room. Malcolm stood by the far window, hands clasped behind his back, his frame cast in silhouette. He didn't look at her when she entered, but he didn't need to. He always knew when she was near. "You handled it well," he said. She stepped further in, her heels tapping lightly against the hardwood as she made her way to the other side of the desk. "I didn't give her what she wanted. No. You gave her what she deserved." Amara's posture remained composed, though her arms crossed slowly in front of her, more out of thought than defense. She didn't sit. "She wasn't here for long. She said she's going to sue," she said, matter of fact, as if recounting the weather. "Said she'd speak to her attorney. Claimed the ban was personal retaliation and that she'd be taking it to court." Malcolm finally turned. His expression didn't shift, not even at the word sue. He crossed to the decanter near the corner and poured a glass of still water, his movements as fluid as ever, unhurried, as if the word itself had no real weight. "Of course she did," he said, placing the decanter down gently. "It's the last trick people like her know. Threaten, intimidate, pretend the system they abused is still designed to protect them. She said she'd been shopping there longer than I've been alive. That I was a temporary fixture." Amara said the phrase with a soft, clipped emphasis, letting it hang in the air just long enough for the absurdity of it to settle between them. Malcolm's brow lifted faintly. "Funny, I don't remember her name on the deed." She thought Carly would back her up. That was the most pathetic part, like she couldn't process the fact that the world moved on without her consent. Malcolm leaned back against the edge of his desk, the glass untouched in his hand. "She's still operating from the illusion that her voice carries the same authority it used to. But authority doesn't come from volume. It comes from ownership." Amara nodded, slowly. "And now, that's exactly what we have." He looked at her then, the weight of the moment clear between them. "She'll try to bluff," he said. "She'll drop words like litigation and discrimination and breach of service. And then, the second she sees the actual legal standing, she'll realize how little ground she's standing on." Amara allowed a small, breathless laugh to escape. "I told her to check the property records before she embarrassed herself further. That was generous. I was feeling gracious." Malcolm smiled at that. Not a wide smile, not celebratory, but something quieter. A recognition of the poise that had carried her not just through the confrontation, but beyond it. Not once had she raised her voice. Not once had she needed to prove anything. She had stood where she belonged and made it known, without needing permission, apology, or revenge. "She won't take this well," Malcolm said. "Women like that never do. Their entire identity is built on being beyond consequence." "She looked shocked," Amara murmured, "like she'd been betrayed by the ground." "That's because she thought she was still standing on it." Amara crossed to the window now, gazing out at the buildings bathed in gold and shadow, her reflection caught beside her father's in the glass. "I don't think she understood what was happening until it was already over." "She understood," Malcolm said. "She just didn't believe it." Another silence settled, but this one wasn't heavy. It was full, steady. Their work was done, and the weight of justice had been placed exactly where it belonged. "I'm not interested in her lawsuit threats," Malcolm said finally. "She'll rattle her lawyers, toss out letters, posture in private emails. And when that fails, she'll try to use the court of public opinion. Let her. We don't answer to opinion. We answer to results." Amara nodded. "And results are permanent." He stepped beside her, both of them looking out over the city now. "You did more than prove a point," he said. "You rewrote the entire dynamic. You didn't just return to that space. You redefined it. And you didn't need a title to do it. You did it because you refused to be moved." Amara didn't look at him. Her voice was soft. "She said people like me burn bright and disappear." He turned toward her. "No, people like you become the fire itself." They stood there for a long moment, the city alive beneath them, the boutique far behind them, but forever changed. Not by violence, not by spectacle, but by clarity, and by the unflinching steadiness of a girl who had once been told she didn't belong, and had now taken the keys to the door they tried to lock her out of. 2 weeks passed. The boutique had never been louder with color, yet quieter in tone. Not a single rack had changed position, not a single wall had been repainted, but everything was different now. The silence inside no longer buzzed with discomfort. It hummed with calm certainty, like the kind that settles into a room after a storm has passed. Customers moved through the aisles with measured ease, brows lifting not because they felt unwelcome, but because they now noticed something they hadn't before. The staff didn't linger at the corners. They moved confidently, smiles real, eyes present. The nervous glances, the whispered hesitations, they were gone. Amara stood behind the counter that once represented the edge of her exclusion. Now it was hers. Not by title, but by presence. She didn't need to announce it. The floor belonged to her the moment she stepped into it. Rena stood beside her, scanning inventory for the next week's shipments, and gave a soft nod toward the front as 2 women entered. One was older, dressed in a simple wool coat, her hair natural and graying at the edges. The other looked no older than Amara herself, her eyes wide with quiet wonder as they took in the boutique's polished glow. Amara greeted them with a single glance and a small smile. "Welcome in," she said, her tone warm but composed. "Let me know if you'd like to try anything on." The older woman smiled. "We're just looking for something for her first formal," she said, gesturing to the girl beside her. "We weren't sure we'd find anything in our budget, but it's nice to walk into a place and not feel watched." Amara didn't need to ask what she meant. She understood, down to the bone. "You're in the right place," she said simply. The girl smiled back and walked toward the display racks, her mother following with careful, grateful steps. Rena watched them for a moment, then turned to Amara. "You changed this place," she said quietly. "Without a single renovation." Amara exhaled slowly. "I didn't need to change the walls. I just needed to remind them who they were meant to hold." Rena smiled, her tone light but reverent. "And now it's doing what it always claimed to do. Just finally, honestly." A few hours later, after the boutique had emptied and the register drawer was closed, Amara stepped outside, coat tucked over her shoulders, the soft bite of evening wind brushing across her skin. The sky was low and moody, clouds stretching across the horizon like velvet, and the city lights flickered to life beneath it, slow and steady. Malcolm's car pulled up without a sound. He didn't get out. He never did. She slipped into the passenger seat and fastened her seatbelt, her movements unhurried. "She hasn't come back," he said without looking at her. "She won't." He nodded once, the faintest hint of satisfaction in the motion. "I got an email," he added, "a statement from her attorney. Thin, all posture, no case. They're walking it back." Amara leaned her head against the window, watching the storefront disappear behind them as the car pulled forward into traffic. She thought fear would make us fold. She thought entitlement was immunity. They rode in silence for a while. Not the kind that held distance, but the kind that let the weight of a chapter closing settle into the space between them. "I want to do something with the back office," Amara said at last. "Make it a space for interns. Kids from schools that don't get invited to places like that. Give them something tangible to step into." Malcolm looked over, his eyes proud, though he didn't say it. "It's yours. Build what you want." She nodded slowly, her voice softer now. "It feels like I finally moved the weight from my shoulders to my hands, like I'm holding something now, something real." "You are," he said. "And you didn't just carry the weight. You built something with it." They drove on, the city sprawling around them, wide and full. The lights blurred slightly in the glass, but Amara's reflection remained sharp, defined not by what she had endured, but by what she had claimed. No apologies, no pleas for understanding, just space, owned, occupied, protected. Linda Worthington had become a shadow. No press, no lawsuit, No return, just a closed door behind her, and a room that would never again bend in her direction. Inside the boutique, under soft light and warm air, a young girl stepped from a fitting room, the hem of her navy blue gown swaying slightly around her ankles. Her mother's hand flew to her mouth, eyes glistening. Rihanna smiled as she approached, with the kind of ease that had come back into her step recently. "Would you like me to hold it at the counter?" The girl looked at her mother, then nodded. Behind them, just faintly, the door chimed again. A new customer entered. The day continued. And upstairs, in an office above it all, a nameplate had been added to the corner of a sleek black desk. Amara Daniels, strategic consultant, not for show, not for vanity, but because no one would ever again question whether she belonged in the room. I hope you enjoyed that story. Please share it with your friends and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. In the meantime, I have handpicked 2 stories for you that I think you will enjoy. Have a great day.